Good morning. 1 in 5 Canadians lives with a disability. This past year has been extraordinarily difficult for them. Un Canadien sur 5 a un handicap. Cette dernière année a été très difficile pour eux. They've been amongst the groups the hardest hit by the pandemic, hit hard by isolation, by job losses, and the lack of access to the supports they need. These fellow Canadians need our support right now to live full lives and participate fully in society, including in the workforce. Canada's Conservatives have a plan to break down the barriers faced by Canadians living with disabilities. We know how important it is for Canadians of every ability to have security and financial independence to lead their lives. Canada's recovery plan will double the disability supplement in the Canada Workers Benefit from $713 to $1,500, providing a major boost to lower-income Canadians with disabilities, on top of our increase in the Canada Workers Benefit. Pour aider les personnes handicapées à faible revenu, le plan de rétablissement du Canada va doubler le supplément pour l'invalidité de l'allocation canadienne pour les travailleurs de $744 à $1,005. On va aussi augmenter l'allocation canadienne pour les travailleurs. We will ensure the most help goes to families where one member has a disability. Too often, when someone on disability benefits pursues work, it costs them in benefit cuts and higher taxes. Our system of federal and provincial benefits should not punish work and make people poorer for choosing to work. We need to empower Canadians with disabilities to pursue their own meaningful participation in the workforce. That starts with overhauling the complex array of disability supports and benefits to ensure that working always leaves someone further ahead. We will work with the provinces to ensure that federal programs are designed to work with provincial programs to achieve this result. To give more Canadians with disabilities access to financial support, we will reduce the number of hours required to qualify for the disability tax credit and the registered disability savings plan from 14 to 10 hours per week. In 2017, Justin Trudeau took away the support from thousands of Canadians who relied on it when he changed how Canadians qualify for these programs. To some, this credit was worth thousands of dollars per year. Conservatives joined disability advocates to successfully fight back against this tax grab. En 2017, Justin Trudeau a enlevé ce soutien aux milliers de personnes qui en avaient besoin quand il a changé l'admissibilité au programme. Pour certains, ce crédit représentait des milliers de dollars par année. Les conservateurs et des défenseurs des personnes handicapées ont réussi à annuler cette mesure injuste. Our changes will save a person with a disability or their family an average of $2,100 per year. Making it easier to qualify for the tax credit will also make it easier to qualify for the Registered Disability Savings Plan, which provides up to $3,500 per year in matching grants for Canadians with disabilities. Canadians with disabilities deserve to be able to leave their homes confidently, knowing that wherever they choose to go, their accessibility needs will be respected and accommodated. This is why we will provide an additional $80 million per year through the Enabling Accessibility Fund. This will provide additional incentives for small business and community projects to improve accessibility, fund grants and support for all types of accessibility equipment that Canadians with disabilities need to work, and make enhancements to existing programs that will get more Canadians with disabilities into the workforce. Avec le Fonds pour l'accessibilité, on va offrir 420 millions de dollars additionnels par année. Ce fonds va donner des incitatifs additionnels aux PME et aux communautés. Surtout, ça va améliorer l'accessibilité en plus de financer des subventions et l'équipement dont les personnes handicapées ont besoin pour travailler. Pour que les gens handicapés participent plus à la population active, on va améliorer les programmes existants. The disability community has been advocating for these improvements for years, but their demands have too often been met with lip service from the Trudeau government rather than concrete action. Conservatives are prepared to put our money where our mouth is and provide real, immediate funding to these programs to help Canadians with disabilities. Together, we will secure the future for Canadians with disabilities and their families. Ensemble, on va agir pour l'avenir. Merci beaucoup. Thank you very much.
We will now be taking questions. Nous allons maintenant prendre des questions.
Hello, Mr. O'Toole. Ian Bailey, Globe and Mail. Sort of a different subject than the one you've just discussed. The federal Liberal government has has proposed record levels of immigration, about 400,000 new permanent residents. As Prime Minister, would you keep or cut that number?
We need immigration for our country. Our country's built on it. We need it for our economic recovery. We need it for our long-term prosperity. So we will have increasing numbers of immigration each year in a major way. We're also going to fix the problems and backlogs in family reunification, many of which were in place before the pandemic and have been made worse. We also want to improve skills recognition and credential recognition for people before they even hit the ground running in Canada. So Canada's recovery plan is about an economic recovery in all sectors, in all regions, and supporting families. Growing and addressing the skills gap is a key part of that, so immigration is critical to securing the future.
And the Liberal Party has, the Prime Minister in particular, has invoked the name of Stephen Harper on the campaign trail. Do you see Mr. Harper as an asset or a liability in your own effort to win the election, particularly with moderate and swing voters?
Well, listen, I was very proud to be a part of a government that balanced the budget, that showed Canadian leadership on the world stage, that actually reduced taxes, gave families and small businesses a break. There's a housing and an affordability crisis right now across Canada. And I was proud to be the last minister in that government improving programs for veterans and military families. That's my record, and I'm very proud to run on it. Mr. Trudeau is running away from his record, and from the very start of his fourth wave opportunistic election, he's tried to divide Canadians, he's tried to mislead Canadians, and he's running from his record, which is one of corruption, 3 personal ethical investigations, and no plan post-COVID-19. Canada's recovery plan is the plan we need. I'm an ethical leader that's been very clear to Canadians. I want all families to have an economic recovery. I want to give you a break, and I want to get the country back on its feet.
Next question.
Mr. O'Toole, Kevin Gallagher, CTV National News. I don't know if you had a chance to look at today's CTV Nanos poll, but it does show that the Conservatives are gaining ground on the Liberals. You're about 1.9 percentage points behind at 32.3%. But in preferred Prime Minister, you've also gained some ground in terms of the people that were polled, but it's not quite as much. So the gap's narrowed a little bit. You're about 7.4 percentage points behind Mr. Trudeau as the preferred Prime Minister for most Canadians. So, after this first week of the campaign, what do you think will be the key for you moving forward to try and narrow that gap and win over more Canadians?
The key for me is also the key for Canada coming through a last difficult year and a half. Canada's recovery plan. Canadians deserve a plan, and as a new leader that hasn't been able to travel through COVID-19, I'm very proud of our plan. And we're telling all Canadians that we're going to have a recovery in all sectors of our economy, all regions of the country. We're going to tackle challenging issues. We're going to tackle inequalities. We're going to help families living with disabilities. As I said today, we want to make sure that there's no clawback if someone with a disability is able to work part-time. They should never be falling behind by working. So we are going to show a lot of compassion. We're going to get the country back on its feet after COVID. And the more people that hear our plan and learn about Canada's recovery plan, that are beginning to realize we need to get moving forward, and the Conservatives are are offering a positive vision for that. Les Canadiens et les Canadiennes méritent un plan après une année très difficile avec la pandémie. Et on doit avoir une relance économique dans chaque secteur de notre économie et toutes les régions de notre pays. Et pour un nouveau chef, j'ai une nouvelle approche, mais aussi j'ai un plan avec 5 piliers pour le bien-être des Canadiens et des Québécois. Notre plan pour le rétablissement du Canada va avoir une reprise économique. On doit adresser les défis, particulièrement aujourd'hui pour les familles avec les personnes handicapées. On va démontrer beaucoup d'action et compassion comme un gouvernement en attend.
Okay, well, my follow-up, I just want to ask you actually about today's announcement, the disability tax credit, lowering the eligibility for life-saving therapies from 14 hours to 10. As you know, back in 2017, there was a big issue for a lot of people who are diabetic in Canada. I'm wondering what you think, talk to disabled Canadians. What does that mean, though, to lower that to 10 hours a week? Do you anticipate a larger number of Canadians, people with different types of disabilities? How many more people will be able to benefit from that tax credit? And do you have, I guess you don't have costing yet. I know that that's coming. If you have some, I'd love to know.
We are getting the PBO to cost it, and we will have a second edition of Canada's Recovery Plan. But I want more families to qualify for the disability tax credit. Justin Trudeau tried to take it away from families with diabetes, with autism. In some cases, Conservatives, we heard from thousands of people that Mr. Trudeau's changes a few years ago would have hurt. So we actually worked alongside disability advocates to fight back against those changes. What we're announcing today is actually going to make more Canadians eligible. And after COVID-19, we have to help some of the Canadians that are hurting the most. This measure is not only going to double the disability supplement for Canadians with a disability. We're going to allow more families to qualify for the disability tax credit. That will help them qualify for the registered disability savings plan too, and we're going to enhance accessibility. This is another example where the Trudeau government has talked about these things, but never delivered in 6 years, and disability groups have been asking for it. Canada's Conservatives, we will deliver.
Next question.
Mr. O'Toole, welcome to my home province of Alberta. Travis Danraj, CBC National News. In your platform, you talk about embracing diversity when it comes to immigration. However, I don't see a section where you outline specific plans to combat systemic racism and deal with issues facing diverse communities. Following with the campaign this week, looking around at the crowd, including last night in Saskatoon, I couldn't help but notice that most of your in-person rallies have been short on representation. For the undecided BIPOC Canadian, what is your message when they see these rallies and a platform lacking a firm plan on this front?
Well, Travis, last night the folks in Saskatoon that I appreciated coming out the most was a couple who immigrated to Canada from India 42 years ago, and they got there just as I finished my remarks because they were helping take care of their grandkids. And they're proud to be Canadians and they're proud to be Conservatives. And what I've said from the first moment I became leader, almost a year ago now, in my speech at 1:30 in the morning, I want more Canadians from all backgrounds, from all faiths, from all sexual orientations, whether you've been in Canada three months or 3 generations, to take a look at the Conservative Party. We want to tackle the challenges facing our country, and we have a diverse set of candidates offering Canada's Recovery Plan to do that. And we're getting great traction. And as more people get to hear our message, we need their help to help get the country back on its feet.
There have been a lot of questions about the Liberals' promise to pass a bill banning conversion therapy and why they weren't able to get it done before Parliament was dissolved. Your platform is clear. Your party opposes the practice, but it also includes that a ban would, quote, not criminalize non-coercive conversations for parents and others. Can you define what a non-coercive conversation is, and how will you monitor this?
Let me first start by being crystal clear. Conversion therapy harms people. It's wrong. and I will ban it as Prime Minister. And what I will do is act. This is yet another example. If you notice a theme building with Mr. Trudeau, I think he cares about this issue as well, but he never delivers. He delayed, he prorogued Parliament to cover up his We Charity scandal. I will bring it forward because I've always been an ally for the LGBTQ community. It's important for me as Prime Minister to defend the rights of all Canadians and to make sure that we all have a recovery after COVID. So let me be clear, we will implement and pass a ban, and Canadians will know the Conservatives will act where Mr. Trudeau often fails to.
En français, s'il vous plaît.
On va avoir une approche contre la thérapie de conversion parce que c'est injuste. Et je suis un allié pour la communauté LGBTQ et je vais agir. Pas comme M. Trudeau, avec les camouflages, avec les délais, avec ce projet de loi, avec la prorogation de camoufler le scandale We Charity. Les membres de la communauté LGBTQ méritent un gouvernement qui va protéger leurs droits. Je vais faire ça comme Premier ministre.
Prochaine question.
Oui, bonjour, M. O'Toole. Laurence Martin de Radio-Canada. Sur l'Afghanistan, on a appris ce matin qu'il y a près de 1000 Afghans là, qui ont été évacués vers le Canada. Si vous étiez Premier ministre en ce moment, qu'est-ce que vous feriez différent, sachant que l'accès à l'aéroport de Kaboul est très chaotique, que même les militaires déployés sont en danger? Qu'est-ce que vous feriez différent, M. O'Toole?
Il y a 5 ans, j'ai demandé action sur la situation sur le terrain en Afghanistan. Maintenant, je vais agir avec nos forces armées canadiennes en étroite collaboration avec nos alliés. C'est important d'avoir un Premier ministre sérieux et respecté sur la scène internationale. Je vais toujours travailler très fort pour nos valeurs chez nous et à travers le monde. Et la situation en Afghanistan est triste et on doit agir pour les traducteurs et les personnes sur le terrain en danger à cause de leur aide pour nos forces armées et nos bénévoles sur le terrain.
Puis une autre question. Pourquoi est-ce que M. Kenney n'est pas avec vous aujourd'hui? Vous n'avez pas été visible avec lui aussi lors du Stampede à Calgary. Pourtant, M. Kenney vous a soutenu durant la course au leadership. Donc, est-ce que vous essayez de vous distancer de M. Kenney parce qu'il est très critiqué en Alberta en ce moment?
Mr. Kenney est un ami à moi. On a travaillé dans le gouvernement conservateur. Il était le ministre des Défenses et moi, l'ancien combattant. Et je vais travailler avec tous les premiers ministres sur une relance économique. Ici en Alberta, on va rétablir la confiance de la secteur privé sur les investissements ici en Alberta. Je vais travailler avec tous les premiers ministres, n'importe quel parti, parce que les Canadiens, les Québécois méritent un gouvernement fédéral qui va respecter les champs des compétences et qui va cibler sur la relance économique. Et ça serait la même chose avec le gouvernement de M. Legault. J'ai beaucoup de respect pour lui. On a beaucoup de choses en commun sur la création de richesses, sur la pénurie de main-d'œuvre, l'Internet haute vitesse. C'est le temps pour un gouvernement, un fédéralisme de partenariat. Et je vais agir comme ça.
In English, on Mr. Kenney, please.
Mr. Kenney, Premier Kenney, is a friend of mine. When I was in the government as Veterans Minister, he was Defense Minister. And I'll work with the Premier of Alberta, the Premier of British Columbia, the incoming Premier in Nova Scotia, where there was a change with a Liberal government that tried to call a snap election in a pandemic. I want to make sure that we have an economic recovery in all sectors of our economy and all regions of our country, because our country's become fractured under Mr. Trudeau, in part because there's always an Ottawa knows best approach. I will respect provincial jurisdiction. I will have a federalism of partnership. And Canadians, regardless of what province you live in, we can't afford more of the same with Mr. Trudeau and his approach. So I'm asking Canadians to take a look at Canada's Conservatives.
Next question.
Abigail Beeman, Global News. You're promising to work together with the provinces so that disability benefits work smoothly. During the pandemic, people with disabilities living in provinces like here in Alberta with Conservative provincial governments saw their provincial disability benefits clawed back if they accepted federal supports. Is that what your promise is targeting? And if you were in power, would you push back on provincial Conservative governments for doing that?
Well, what I've announced today is a comprehensive set of policies to help the 1 in 5 Canadian families touched by someone in the household with a disability. So we're going to double the disability supplement of the Canada Workers Benefit. We're going to add to the Accessibility Fund. We're going to have many more Canadians qualify for the disability tax credit. And we will work with the provinces, who I know share our vision. If someone works part-time or has some work that helps them feel purpose and be fulfilled as a person living with a disability, to show their ability, they should never be worse off than if they didn't work. I saw that as Veterans Minister, as veterans were recovering. We need to show the nobility of working, never claw it back so it makes it less advantageous to work. And I know provinces share that vision, and this is an area where we will have to have federalism of partnership so that we can respect jurisdiction but achieve these objectives together.
Last night in Saskatoon, I heard one of your supporters voice his displeasure that you flip-flopped on the carbon tax. He told you, quote, that you have a lot of pissed off farmers to deal with. I'm wondering what your message is to voters like him and also here in Alberta to the oil and gas industry. And are you worried people opposed to your carbon plan will take their vote elsewhere?
Well, first, for the farmers in Saskatchewan, the drought situation has been devastating. And so I want them to know that the federal government will always try and be with them and work with our provincial partners for the well-being of farming families. I met some last night that are transferring to the 5th generation. We've made it easier to do that, something the Liberals tried to fight. I've been crystal clear why climate change is important to me, not just as a politician. I talk about climate change with my daughter Molly, who's 15, and we need to make our emission targets as a country. I've put forward a plan to the provinces that can help us achieve that. It does price carbon, and I do get some questions about it, and sometimes some people frustrated about that, but it shows my commitment. And by the time I finished that conversation, they understood. We need to get the country working again, and my plan will meet our Paris commitments, but will have vastly better jobs and investment numbers than Mr. Trudeau's ever-increasing carbon tax. It's smart policy. It's why I put it out in April, and it's a critical part of Canada's recovery plan. On a un plan d'atteindre nos objectifs de Paris sans une diminution des investissements et des emplois ici au Canada. On a un prix sur le carbone, et c'était un changement pour notre parti, bien sûr, mais je suis en train de parler sur notre plan, notre vision sur l'environnement. C'est très important. Le changement climatique est une priorité pour moi, comme un politicien, mais aussi comme un père de famille. Je parle avec ma fille sur le changement climatique, sur l'environnement. On doit agir pour notre environnement tout en respectant les emplois et notre économie. En avril, on a lancé notre plateforme sur ça. C'est dans notre plan pour le rétablissement du Canada. C'est une priorité pour moi et je vais agir comme Premier ministre. And I think Canada should meet commitments we make, particularly when it comes to the environment. So at the end of that conversation, he understood. I think that's what elections should be about. They shouldn't be about division, like Mr. Trudeau each day, trying to mislead people, trying to divide. We have Canada's recovery plan, which is comprehensive. And as people get to hear our vision for the future, our positive vision that we will attain our environmental objectives and get people back to work, it's the exact type of positive plan we need coming out of COVID. La taxe sur le carbone est très difficile pour les fermes familiales, bien sûr. Et c'est pourquoi je suis en train d'avoir des conversations avec les Canadiens sur notre plan pour le rétablissement du Canada et notre plan pour les changements climatiques. On va atteindre nos objectifs sans une diminution de notre économie. On a travaillé très fort avec les experts sur notre plan et c'est un exemple de notre approche. Un plan pour notre avenir et pas une approche de division, comme M. Trudeau avec son élection en pleine pandémie.
Your campaign platform also proposes a mandate review for CBC English, TV and digital and news world, and that's also a long way from your leadership platform, which proposed defunding and privatizing those networks. I'm wondering if you changed your mind on the utility of those networks to Canada, or did you soften that approach, for political expediency, basically?
I always use the term modernize CBC because I do think, even from our own family's perspective, even traveling this week, the kids stream a lot of their content and are using alternative providers. So what we have to do is make sure we balance the playing field with American web giants without attacking free speech, as Mr. Trudeau has done, trying to regulate people's social media. But it is time to say, should parts of a public interest broadcaster make it hard for private sector newspapers and broadcasters to compete in a digital age? I think this is part of a mandate review that will look at big investments in digital, big investments in television that are making it hard for our private sector to have that competition, diversity of voices. I think is responsible, and that's what I've always talked about: modernize and preserve the public interest elements. And if you notice, the public interest elements, including radio, don't compete with the private sector. They still have the public interest mandate of no commercials or serving the critical linguistic duality of our country. I think it's time to make sure we're building a country and a landscape of the modern time and to have an open process with Canadians.
Next question.
Chris Reynolds, Canadian Press. On your stops through Manitoba, Saskatchewan, and Alberta, your campaign has largely remained within ridings that are Conservative held rather than ridings the party is hoping to win back. And part of the reason for this is that these three provinces are the only three where the Conservative Party has a majority or half the seats in the case of Manitoba. But nonetheless, is part of the reason for sticking to ridings already held, as well as the safety of a studio in downtown Ottawa hotel for teletown halls, that there is a real effort simply to hold on to the furniture already owned rather than acquire a slew of new seats?
Interesting question. I think most Canadians wouldn't know that through the telephone town halls we've had in southwestern Ontario, in New Brunswick, in Quebec, already in this campaign has meant I've spoken to more Canadians about Canada's recovery plan than all the other leaders combined. We're traveling the country in a way that's also in full accordance with health provisions, and we're trying to talk about our positive vision for Canada. And we will continue to do that. As a COVID-era leader, I've used how we can leverage technology to have conversations with Canadians about what we need to do to get the country back on its feet. I want to connect with as many Canadians as possible that are worried about more years of division under Mr. Trudeau, more cover-ups, more ethical breaches. People are becoming quite tired of the Trudeau government's approach, and this cynical fourth wave election is an example of it. So stay tuned for more conversations from one coast to another.
On the second day of the campaign, you released the party's platform, and you can refer back to it repeatedly. So I imagine there are some strategic advantages to that, but I'm also wondering if there is a concern that there is such a vast grab bag of pocketbook issues to choose from in this platform that it lacks a central message. I know there are 5 pillars of this platform, but is it possible to sum up a driving theme throughout in 10 words or less?
Recovery. Canada's Recovery Plan is what it's called. It has 5 key pillars: 1 million jobs in a year, accountability after Mr. Trudeau's lack of accountability and transparency, national leadership on mental health, something that the challenges of which will be with us after the pandemic, domestic capacity in vaccines and being ready in the future, and 5th, making sure we don't bankrupt our children. Mr. Trudeau's on that course. We need to balance the budget in the decade. Securing the future is why we're running in this election. Canadians deserve a plan. They deserve an experienced leader who is going to deliver more than photo ops. We're going to deliver for Canadians. Today, we've talked about delivering for the 1 in 5 Canadian families that have a disability in their household. We're going to empower them. We're going to respect them. And the more Canadians find out about Canada's recovery plan, they're seeing it's exactly what our country needs after a very difficult 15, 16 months.
This will be the last question. Ce sera la dernière question.
Good morning, Mr. O'Toole. This is Liv with the Epoch Times. The Chinese Communist regime hit COVID-19, let it to spread and kill Canadians. And the Chinese Communist regime also kidnap and sentence our Canadians to prison and death. If Conservative Party win the election, how will your government respond to the challenge and threat from the Chinese Communist regime? Thank you.
Well, listen, we will work with our allies to look at all investigations with respect to COVID-19, both its origins and where there were slow responses that really led to a slower global response, and particularly in Canada, Mr. Trudeau canceling the pandemic warning system, other elements that had us unready. This is why I'm literally going to court to stop Mr. Trudeau from covering up the situation with scientists at our top secret Winnipeg lab having strong links with the Chinese military and actually sharing virus samples with the Wuhan Institute of Virology. That needs to be transparent. It's unacceptable. The situation for our 2 citizens, the 2 Michaels, is also unacceptable, approaching almost 1,000 days in captivity. From the very start of his time as Prime Minister, Mr. Trudeau has been offside with respect to Communist China. With a Conservative government led by me, Canada will stand up alongside our allies for our citizens, for our security, for trade and jobs in Canada, and to make sure that we're once again a champion for human rights, as we were when we brought the motion to declare the genocide against the Uyghur minority population in China.
This will be all for today. Merci beaucoup. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Merci beaucoup.